What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another day of SaberSim's DFS office hours. We've got a bit of a special edition today. We've been looking forward to this all week here in preparation for the kickoff, I guess, of the 2022 NASCAR season. The SaberSim team here has been hard at work in creating our new NASCAR Sims model, projection, all of that. That is actually being unveiled basically as we speak. I know we've got projections and sims up here now for the dual races tonight. And we're planning, of course, on supporting this release here of our new model with a bunch of NASCAR DFS strategy content, streams, videos, and things like that. But I am not an expert in the NASCAR DFS space at all. Actually, quite a beginner to this space. So wanted to bring somebody in who was. So asked around the community a little bit, did a little detective work. I went picking through the SaberSim winner's circle wall here, and I found Dan, aka Kingfishnado, in Slack here, and he was happy to come on and talk a little bit of NASCAR strategy with me here today. So first of all, welcome, Dan. Thanks for joining the stream with me. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, awesome. I was super excited for this one. Glad to have you here. I guess we'll go ahead and just jump right in. Before we get started, I know there are a couple questions that have already come into Slack. So if you have questions for Dan here as we're going forward, go ahead and pop them into YouTube chat or pop them into Slack, and we'll try to get into everything. But I guess to just get us kicked off, Dan, what is your kind of background with NASCAR DFS? What's your history with the sport? What do you like about it?
Sure. I've been a NASCAR fan for a long time. I used to drive. I'm from New York. Used to drive down to South Carolina every year, go to the Southern 500, which is in Darlington, and then once NASCAR went live on DraftKings, it just was the natural way to go, and I've been doing it since.
Awesome. Yeah, and you had mentioned, I know you were talking before the stream here, that you have some live finals experience as well.
Yeah, NASCAR multi-time live finalist, PGA for golf, King of the Beach for football. So
awesome.
Been around the block a little bit.
Cool. Yeah.
Didn't win any of them, but
that's okay. It's you win some. There's the experience of going. I feel like sometimes is
it's the best part.
Enough. Yeah. Awesome. Cool. I know you had mentioned in Slack when we were talking earlier this week that like the one thing you would say is to not be sweating your lineups until the race is over. What's the NASCAR DFS sweat like overall for those of us that maybe will be putting in our first lineups for Daytona this weekend?
Oh, it's terrible. I've gone from winning $50,000 with half a lap left to losing money.
Yeah.
Because one guy gets a flat tire as he's coming around the turn 4. It's, as far as sports go, it's one of the quickest changing DFS sports as far as scoring goes. You can go from nothing to something and something to nothing just in the blink of an eye.
Gotcha. So not so much the posting screenshots in the first 15-20 minutes of the race kind of thing.
You have a good chance of that being the only time you're winning if you're posting that early.
Gotcha. Cool. So yeah, I mean, I wanted to just kind of get going on some like higher level strategy kinds of things, just the fundamentals, the basics of the sport here. So obviously, when we're using simulations to build lineups on SaberSim, one of the most important things is the variance of the sport. Would you describe NASCAR as a higher or a lower variance sport overall?
Yeah, I'd say it's super high variance.
Okay.
You got so many elements that can change it and can change so quick. You've got the vehicles themselves. They can, blow a tire because of, just because someone dents their fender in, or they can hit a piece of debris. You've got the track. The conditions change as the temperature changes outside. They go from 100-degree track temperature to 50-degree track temperature as the sun goes down for a night race. Changes, how the tires grip. You've got weather. You could get a 5-minute rain delay, which now takes all the rubber off the track and makes it a green track, which completely changes how it handles. So you've got that, and then you just got the drivers themselves. You get some of these races, Vegas, they get so hot that they've had drivers, they've had to take them out of the car. They've literally dragged them out of the cars in the pits. So there's a lot of things that can come out of nowhere and change things.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, I mean, we'll talk as we go along here a little bit about like lineup building strategies, but what impact does that have, knowing that it's, such a high variance sport on your player pool, your exposures? I mean, I assume that you probably don't want to be too condensed on one driver or another with a higher variance sport like this.
No, that's correct. I normally tend to, I won't say the word because Matt might get mad at me. I usually cap the exposure at a relatively low number.
Yeah.
You've got so many things, and that's all based, stepping back, that's all based on the race, the track, how people qualify. There's certain tracks where, there's those guys, I don't care what position they start, you're not going to play them. They're just, they're not going to, be the guys you want to play. And then there's certain guys that, on a certain kind of track, you almost have to play no matter where they start. So it can be, there's a lot of factors that really can come into, making those decisions.
Yeah, we've got Matt in the YouTube chat with the rage emoji already here. So welcome, Matt. Cool. Yeah, I mean, so then I guess kind of thinking about the other side of the variance puzzle here and ownership, right? Is this a sport where, you would say that chalk is somewhat unreliable, kind of like the other higher variance sports I talk about, in baseball all the time here, that you can almost just like start thinking about auto fading the chalky stack on certain contest types in a sport where variance is so high. Whereas NBA, obviously, right, lower variance sport, a lot of times the chalk is legitimately centered around the best plays. How does that play into navigating ownership for NASCAR?
So ownership and chalk, I'd say it's a lot different than baseball. Baseball, you can deal with the chalk.
Yeah.
Even if that chalk goes off for, you get a guy who gets 2 home runs. If you don't have him, there could be another guy who gets 2 home runs. And then you're fine. Whereas if you have a chalk guy, based on whatever you deem him as chalky, if you don't have him, you're basically screwed.
Gotcha.
You're not gonna, you don't always have to play all the chalk. You don't have to max them out and play them, 100% of your lines. But, you get say a specific course race type, maybe a low crash incident race where the guy qualified or practices really well, but qualified, really bad and has to start at the rear. But it was he was put to the rear without losing the points. If he qualifies in first and they dump him in the rear because of, say, an engine change, some races he still starts at first, but is scored from 40th, where some they score him from 40th. So if that guy practiced really well for whatever reason, but then has to start in the rear, and he's got the kind of driver who's good at this specific type of track, there's a good chance he can get up to, mid-pack, and that's just huge as far as place differential, starting and finishing position, all that kind of stuff. And if they're moving up that fast, there's a good chance they're going to get a lot of laps led and stuff like that. So I would say, as far as chalk, sometimes you got to eat it.
Right.
But again, with NASCAR, I do a lower max kind of exposure. So even if you eat chalk and it doesn't pan out, you don't necessarily have to have 100% of that chalk. Right. I would never go. I mean, me personally, I would never go that high in NASCAR, because even that chalk guy who's supposed to be good could, blow his motor on lap 2, and now you're sitting with dead weight.
Right. Gotcha. No, it makes sense. So, I mean, you had mentioned, right, like kind of thinking about the baseball analogy, you've got the guy that hits 2 home runs. And in this case, you've got the guy starting at the back of the race who's got a ton of potential to climb a bunch of places throughout the race. What does upside look like for particular drivers in a NASCAR race? So I know, I mean, obviously we've got the the guy starting in the back that maybe has a ton of potential to gain a ton of positions, but I know we've also got the guys starting up front that have the potential to lead a bunch of laps. Like, what are the kind of profiles of upside for drivers that you're looking at as you're building lineups?
Sure. So we start with the guys who start up front.
Okay.
Your dominators, your guys who are going to have laps led, fastest laps. Again, it's totally based on track. There's certain tracks that are super hard to pass. So now your pole sitter could be outside, up front for 20, 30, 40% of the laps, maybe more.
Yeah.
So now they're getting the dominator points. They won't get the place differential, but they'll get the dominator fastest laps as well as, in theory, first place finish. So that's that. And then you get the ones who start in the back, but clearly have fast cars, have a specific style that fits that track type, which will allow them to move up, maybe get some fastest laps, not necessarily laps led, your dominator, but, enough in the other areas. So there's a few different kinds of chalk you can have. And I usually like to, depending on the track, you'll set something like, I want to have one or two dominators, guys who are going to potentially lead X number of laps. But then I also want those place differential guys and, maybe a couple guys that are just safe are going to start roughly around where they are. That'll get you their, finishing place points. And, a lot of it also is you got to look at salaries.
Right.
Yeah. But
Gotcha.
not as much. Definitely not Daytona. One thing I point out, I know we're doing a high overview, but for everybody playing Daytona, don't even look at what salaries are because you could have a lineup that's half the max salary this week.
Yeah, no, we were joking about it here, just the SaberSim team beforehand, that like it almost seems like the salaries are a little bit pulled out of the hat. I had a min salary of like 45 on DraftKings, and I was building some lineups, and I was like, I think I need to turn this all the way down to 0 because like feels kind of all over the place.
For Daytona, absolutely, it's it's for everybody who's starting new. It's a great race to watch. It's fun. I think it's probably one of the better DFS races usually.
Yeah.
But you basically got to take everything you've learned about NASCAR and kind of throw it out the window because anything can and will happen. You're going to get, as they call it, the big one, which shakes things up. So you really don't need a max salary. I mean, you could run the back 5 or 5 guys, 6 guys. It's been a while, and spend $20,000 in salary, and that could be the winning lineup.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Everybody's in play.
Is it true, like in general, then, that you would say that the dominator types are kind of more of the pay up studs on a slate, and the guys in the back are, have a little bit more upside, the place differential kind of drivers, or is it just, a mix of salaries across the starting positions and just kind of depends on?
Yeah, it can be a big mix.
Okay.
It's based on qualifying and starting position. Obviously there's guys who have superior engines and equipment that are going to have a much better chance at dominating. They're just stronger vehicles.
Yeah.
So you're going to see those guys as dominators. You're going to see specific dominators for specific track types, road courses versus ovals versus tri-ovals and all that kind of stuff. And then you could have a guy who is a dominator, qualifies great, and now does a motor swap after qualifying. He has to start in the back.
Yeah.
And if depending on the track, you may never get up to the front again. But then there's guys who can do that and get up to the front within 5-10 laps based, So it is very race dependent.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess this is kind of a good opportunity then to just kind of talk a little bit about your research process. So as you are preparing for a particular race coming up, I know you've mentioned, the car itself, the track, maybe driver history on the track, like a bunch of these different things. Before we kind of talk about, like, I guess what you're looking for, what does your research process overall look like? Are you kind of coming up with like a little cheat sheet that you come up with for yourself with drivers to target or to fade, or are you building like a very rigid driver pool that you're working from, or what's the actual, I guess, kind of like the deliverable or whatever that you go into race day with to build your lineups from?
Sure. So one thing to start with is, and I know a lot of people like hate a specific driver, like
Yeah.
Ricky Stenhouse. They call him Recky because he always crashes. But there's certain races you got to play him, even though you hate him and you know he's going to wreck. Most of the time, you still got to play him. So that's the big thing is you got to stay away from, you know, what your heart says about certain drivers. Yeah, so you're looking at a lot of stuff. You're looking at qualifying, one, to see where they're going to start. That makes a big, difference in how they do it. Then you want to look at practice, which can be deceiving because some guys will, try different things in practice, try, different kinds of different lines. But you want to look at stuff like, is the top line running fast? Is the inside line running fast? Are they starting on the inside line? Are they starting on the top line? Then you want to look at, did they practice and qualify during the day, but now it's a night race. So now, this stuff is going to be completely different. Does it start in the day and end at night? All those kind of things you got to look into. And occasionally you got to look and see, is there weather coming in? Is this race going to make it through stage 2 and then they're going to call it? So you get guys who will play that. You got to look, there's things to look at, like who's going for stage points versus the race. Some people will play just for stage points. Those are points you get at the end of each stage, which count towards playoff points. And some people, they'll play for that as opposed to the win. You'll see more of that like in the first and second stage, which will be a little bit more, sometimes more reserved. And then the third stage, once, those points are off the board, it could get wild because now they're playing strategy. Obviously, you look at, players who are racers who are good at specific track types, who's good at speedways, who's good at, dirt. They have some dirt tracks, who's good at road courses. You can look at teams. I know you don't really think of teams in NASCAR.
Yeah.
But you've got a couple different teams. So you've got manufacturers. So you got Chevy, Toyota, Ford. They're kind of loosely a team. Then you've got engine builders, race teams. So, those guys will play nice. And then you've got guys who are not on the same race team, but maybe they're affiliated because, that the bigger race team built the motor for the smaller race team. So those are all kind of earlier things to look at. But, when it gets down to the race, the end of the race, you're racing really for yourself. So teams kind of go out the window. Like, you're not going to wreck your teammate, in the first lap, but that last lap, you may.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So that was something I was going to ask. So with the teams, probably not really any sense of actual like correlation between those drivers when it comes down to who's going to win the race and building lineups. Like, not really enough of a, I guess if teams were colluding together to like have one of their drivers win the race, I think you could safely say that maybe they're negatively correlated. Probably doesn't really have that kind of factor here.
Yeah, you don't really see too much of that.
Okay.
And you may see something like that for like stage points. The guy who's locked in the playoffs may not fight the guy, his teammate who's, one spot out of the playoffs who can get the stage points and move in. They may just let him pass.
Gotcha.
That's the stage stuff. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So yeah, as you're researching, and I guess you're kind of coming up with your list of drivers that you like for one reason or another here. What do you end up doing with that when you're building your lineups? Are you building kind of a more rigid pool of drivers and you're saying, these are my guys and this is who I'm working with this week? Or is it more, I kind of like this guy. I want to be a little over the field. I'm maybe fading this guy, but I don't want to be completely out, right? We were talking before, I guess maybe higher variance sport, a little bit scary to make those like really aggressive stands. What does that look like for you?
So usually what I'll do is I'll kind of do a hard cap, based on the race and all that. And then I'll go back and I'll kind of run my lines and I'll say, well, you know what? I want, say I set the cap at 50. I'm just, making an arbitrary number. There's these two drivers that based on whatever circumstances, I want 60, 70, 75%, but just those two. And there may be drivers at the bottom end where I don't want any of them. I don't care where they start, I know who they are. I know they're going to be 40 laps down by the end of the race, if they make it, and I'm just going to X them out completely. and then you want to set it to try to, and then work from there. You may want to set some sort of rule where, like, if this one guy is in a, say you have dominators, you may want starting position 1 and 2, but you don't want 1 and 2 together. You want one, right, and then you don't want those two guys in the same line, because if the one guy pulls off in the lead, now that guy is in second place, he's not getting anything. He could have had a first place start, now he's in second, so you're not getting dominator points, you're losing finishing place points, you're losing laps led, all that stuff. Whereas if it flips, then the same thing happens the other way.
Gotcha. Yeah. Cool. And I think this will be something too that I'm excited to talk about. We'll mention this as we get to the end of the stream, but as we're doing more and more NASCAR content here, I know we're planning on having the guys that built the model come in and talk about how the sims look and things like that. But to me, that seems like something that would be a huge advantage of using simulations to build lineups, because that's going to take into account that, two dominators, for example, that are both starting at the top of the race can't really both have their top ceiling outcome in the same race. One of these guys has to win.
Well, I mean, you'd be surprised.
Okay.
You could get two guys. You gotta look at the price, and you get a 500-mile race.
Mm-hmm.
They each lead half of it and finish in a decent finishing spot. They could both be in the nuts.
Gotcha.
You could have a dominator that doesn't necessarily start up front, but based on that he's got phenomenal pit strategy and where his pit box is, that he's going to get up there. Maybe he moves from 15th and leads 20 laps. So you can have multiple dominators that are required for the nuts lineup. It does happen, but a lot of times there's certain guys you just don't want to pair together.
So track length, I guess, kind of, or like the race length in that way, kind of matters a little bit too, right? How many total laps they're racing.
Right. So you've got things to take into account. What's the fuel window? How many laps can they do without refueling? What's the surface of the track? Are they going to eat through tires every 20 laps, or can they go 150 laps without doing tires?
Mm-hmm.
Is it eating the outside tires where they have to do a 2-tire stop? So there's all that kind of stuff. So you can have pitch strategy. There's some of these teams, their pitch strategy is phenomenal. They know when to come in, when not to come in, and then that can move them up 20 spots. But at the same time, you could have something like that where pitch strategy doesn't work, and then you get a caution, and now you're completely out of sequence, and the whole field's ahead of you, and you just you're just going into the pits as the yellow's coming out, and now you're at the back of there's a lot of different things that can happen.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot going on for someone like me who's like gearing up to maybe play his first slate this weekend here. I know we've already talked about a bunch of different factors that can come into play that are things that you're looking at in your research process. If you were to give a newer player, maybe after, you're sitting down with maybe a set of projections, you're ready to build some lineups, one kind of core thing that you would say, research this, look into this a little bit. This is definitely like a sure way to add some value to your process. What would that thing be?
Outside of having good projections, which obviously makes things a little easier, especially when you're doing simulations versus just, basing it off where they start and all that.
Right.
One of the little tricks that you can do is listen to the pit crews radios during practice and all that stuff.
Okay.
And, because a lot of these races, you'll have qualifying practice, or maybe not practice, but qualifying an hour before the race.
Mm-hmm.
Listen to what they're saying. They talk about what's going on with them. Plus, they talk about the other teams and what they're doing. This guy could be like, oh, listen, I'm getting this crazy vibration, whatever, and they may or may not get that fixed. That's one thing. But the big thing is just you can't be stuck on, I got to play Kyle Busch every week, no matter what, because he's the best. You gotta play people based on, all the. So excuse me, what's that?
It's all good.
Okay. Yeah, I'll take care of it. Sorry about that.
No, it's all good.
You gotta base your lines on what they're telling you. What you're finding out, what you're learning throughout the day. Did they practice? Did they qualify and practice early in the week? Did they do it an hour before?
Mm-hmm.
And go with that.
So I guess kind of like on that note, you mentioned practices sometimes an hour before the race starts. When does your I guess two questions really. When does your research process begin for a particular race? When does your lineup building process begin? And when does it end? I know, obviously, if someone told me they were building lineups an hour before lock for NBA, I'd be like, you're out of your mind. You should 10 minutes before lock max. But, football, something like that, you could probably just build sometime that morning as long as you're kind of paying attention. Is NASCAR a sport where you should be building up and using the information as it comes out to you right up to lock pretty much? Or can you generally kind of start that process earlier?
Sure. So, again, that depends when they're qualifying.
Yeah.
A lot of times you can lock your once qualifying's done, you basically can you can call it. I'm done. You can put it in, and then up to close-ish to lock, you just got to keep an eye on any guys who failed inspection or had equipment changes that are getting sent to the back. And then you got to decide if you're going to still play them from the back, or now you got to remove them from your field. I would recommend, a lot of times on tracks where passing is hard, you're going to probably want to remove those guys or go on a way lower percentage. On certain tracks where there's tons of passing, wrecks, you may want to keep them. And, even though they start in 40th and they qualified first, they can still get back and make it into the lineup. But for the most part, once qualifying is done and all that, you're good unless those engine changes, whatever parts they're changing, or inspection failures happen.
And can those kinds of things happen pretty much right up until the actual lock?
No, they're usually for the most part, you get a little. It's not like NBA where you get popped 5 minutes after lock.
Right.
You're gonna know that before the race starts. Because you're going to know that there's now starting at the rear, and that's readily available, stuff. I'm sure you guys could pop a bot that says, pulls off Twitter or whatever that says this guy is now starting in this spot.
We need like the underdog NASCAR Twitter or whatever. I wonder if that's out there already, but yeah. Cool. So, I mean, we talked a little bit about a few things that you're specifically looking for here or ways that you're doing your research. I mean, since you're familiar with the space overall, is there any kind of common wisdom or something that, you read a lot, people saying, hey, go look into this, read into this, that you would disagree with, that you think maybe isn't as valuable as a way to do your research or not as predictive of a factor?
I mean, as with all the other DFS stuff, you got to be careful with information you're gleaning, off Twitter. Well, there's some bad actors out there who will, put stuff out to kind of throw you the other way. You got to follow your main guys who aren't going to put out stuff. Like you may say, oh, this guy's starting in the rear, and you move in the back, and he's not starting from the rear. It's just stuff like that. Yeah, and really, like I said, you can get your lines done for the most part, pretty early. Like by tonight, you should be able to do your Sunday lines.
Okay.
And from there, you just keep an eye on the news, see if anything's changed. You may catch a little piece of information here, or some pit talk chatter there that makes you want to say, what, I want a little less of this guy or a little bit more of that guy. But for the most part, you can, set. It's not like basketball where you got to late swap every half hour until 10 o'clock.
Right.
And the nice thing is once that race starts, you're done. Even if it gets paused for rain, you don't have to change it for when they restart. You're in.
Man, that really sounds nice after half of a season of basketball here. It is a different beast, but cool.
I'll tell you, SaberSim getting the late swap it's game changing as far as NBA goes.
Yeah.
I used to try to manually, swap guys out, and now it's click, 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 and, print some money.
No, the worst thing was being just 100% exposed all of a sudden to the guy that you just had to swap into in 150 lineups or something like that. So, but Matt did drop a little note for us here. Keep in mind that our Daytona projections likely won't be updated for qualifiers until tomorrow morning, which is a good point for anybody listening here. Keep an eye out there.
I think if I'm not mistaken, the second duel tonight. Where's my stuff? It's like an 8:30 Eastern start, so they won't be done till 9. What is it? Oh, it's an 8:45 approximate start today, so they probably won't be done. What are you looking at? An hour and a half. So it's at 9:45, 10:15. That won't be done. And then you've got practice Friday and Saturday for things just to keep an eye on, see how who's running what and all that. So you're legitimately looking. You could sit down Saturday night, Sunday morning, drink your coffee, put some lines together,
right.
and wait for the big one to happen.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So, another question, this is something when I was doing a little bit of research this week, I saw came up a lot with a smaller pool. I think this is just something that happens, especially for these bigger events. Duplication, the building a unique lineup. Is this a sport that you think that's, having an intentional focus on trying to not get duped is important? What kind of things do you do to avoid duplication?
So it can be hard. I play mostly on DraftKings. They've done, some stuff to try to, weed it out and make it not as, as many duplicates, but you only run 42 guys, and you've got, what's the entry on the big GPP? It's
oh gosh, on the milli,
106,000.
There you go.
106,000 entries, and you're looking at probably a few major players as far as projections go. So you're getting a lot of people using a lot of the same stuff. The difference now with SaberSim doing simulations and some other stuff, you've got probably a little bit of a better chance of getting some unique lines, just based on it's not the other core group that people have been using for the last few seasons. And you'll see it based on logos and all that, who's in the top a lot and all that. Obviously you always want to get a unique. It's not really. So there's always those scrubs that if you can get them into your line and it pays off, you're going to get a unique. But it's not like NBA where you're going to get a $3,000 guy who hasn't done anything all season, or baseball, and he comes and hits 3 home runs. There's a good chance that scrub is going to be a scrub and, finish at the back of the pack.
Gotcha.
Not super speedways like Daytona.
Okay. Is there anything? So I know we were talking about salary specific for Daytona kind of means a little bit less. Just in general, one of my favorite tools to use just as a blunt tool to avoid dupes in like NFL Showdown or anything like that is to just cap that max salary. Do you think that's a good strategy here? I typically find that people hand building and things like that will just build lineups using as much salary as they can, and I think that can be a good way to combat that. What are your thoughts there?
I would not cap for Daytona.
Okay.
I would say everybody's in play. If you have a player pool of 42 drivers, that's not terrible, because chances are you're going to have everything from those $25,000 salaries all the way up to the $50,000 in that anyways. So even if you cap it, really what you're doing from there is you're taking out those $25,000 lines that may win.
Capping the maximum salary and saying like the max salary I'm willing to use is like 49.5 or even like 49,000, maybe if you're playing like the milli or something like that.
Yeah, that could help in some races. It's not this race. Like I said, there's a good chance you're gonna have lines that are $25,000-$30,000.
Gotcha.
So you're gonna have a lot of those way under, because this race, anything can happen and anybody can be in the winning line. But there are certain races, sure, you can. You're gonna see where you'll see it a lot by hand building. You're gonna hand build, and by the guys you pick based on whatever, you're gonna see that you're probably gonna get pretty close to that max dollar amount. So you can cap it a little to try to be a little less chalk. But I don't necessarily know that chalk is totally terrible in NASCAR. You don't want to have all the chalk in a line, but I think eating some chalk is generally okay.
Gotcha. Interesting. Okay, cool. Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. an interesting kind of tug of war here of like, yeah, high variance sport, almost anything can happen. And we want to be kind of careful with our exposures, but there's also, it's not so much I keep comparing like to maybe like something like NFL Showdown where you can play some of these low salary guys and get a unique lineup, and you've got a guy that has a chance to, just fall into the end zone. Not necessarily the case here where you still need to, play some of those best projected plays. You need to build a lineup with win equity here. So interesting. I mean, I'm already getting kind of excited to build some lineups here for this weekend. I guess, as we're heading into this weekend, again, I wanted this to be mostly a video about broader NASCAR strategy so that we can make this useful all season long. But specifically for Daytona, you mentioned a couple things with salaries. Anything else that for this race this weekend that you would say maybe a good thing to key into, to look into?
Sure. So a few things. If you're winning with laps left, chances are you're not going to win.
Yeah.
Daytona is usually the last couple laps. You're going to have these crazy wrecks that are going to take out. You can take out half the field, and by the end of the race, you probably have less than half the field running.
Mm-hmm.
General consensus is you want to start guys not in the front. You start in the front, they can get shuffled back and end up, if they get out of the draft on those, those tracks are doing upwards of 200 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
You get out of that draft, you're going to get sucked to the back of the track. You want to take, mid guys, the back guys, the scrubs who are just going to drive around like your grandmother, might end in the optimal. So you want to play them. I don't remember the exact. I'd have to look, but you really, for most part, I want to say like top 10. And don't hold me. Obviously, you don't want to fully fade these guys, but a lot of the top 10 guys may not end in optimal. I'm reading something here. What is it? Where was it? Top 5 drivers. Don't use more than 2 or 3 in the top 15. Definitely don't put all your, don't pick the first 5 starting guys and put them in your line.
So it really is like the highest variance event of a already high variance sport. It sounds like
it's nuts. They basically make this race so guys go out and crash and carnage happens for the fans.
Gotcha.
They're going so fast. Now, listen, to step back a little bit, things could change. I'm not sure what aero package they're running, meaning spoilers and such. Plus, it's the new car. They have a new car this year.
Yeah.
Pit stops going to be different because you're going single lug tire over multi-lug tire. But, they're going so fast that air changes just a little bit, and, all hell could break loose. And it usually does. If it doesn't, then it's going to be a boring race and they just drive around single file for a ton and then it's terrible. But, you're going to see, you should expect a lot of cautions.
Gotcha.
Which, a caution will change everything up. Penalties, you got to watch penalties. Another thing to keep an eye on is guys getting penalties. They could be coming in first place and get a penalty. Now they got to start at the back of the pack, or, last year they had a lot of stuff with lug nuts not being tight. And, guys having to come back and take a penalty. And
a lot of this kind of stuff to me from like a DFS standpoint sounds just very hard to predict, right? Like just naturally increasing the variance of the game.
Right. Like you can't predict a pit crew tire guy letting a tire roll out into pit lane. Like,
yeah.
These guys, they practice it every day the same as a football player, practices catching and running. But, sometimes a football player drops the ball. Sometimes the tire slips out of his hands. Sometimes the air hose for the gun gets stuck under the car and it pulls it into the, pit road. Things you can't predict.
Right.
You can predict stuff like, in theory, with the weather come in and temperature and track temperature and things like that. But you can't predict, some guy pulling into his pit stall too quick and T-boning you as you're pulling out of your pit stall.
Right.
It happens. or your pit crew guy getting run over by the guy in the next pits. So, yeah, there's a lot of predictable stuff, but there's a lot of, roll the dice and hope that it drops in your favor.
Right. All the
At
more
least
reason, I think. Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, all the more reason, I think, to be somewhat spread out on your exposures. Like, you are very much talking me out of being like over maybe even 40% to any one driver.
That's probably where I'll be.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not sure how many lines I'm running yet. That'll be determined how much money I can win over the next few days, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I almost always cap low. And like I said, there's certain races, certain players that like you want to, you bump way up.
Mm-hmm.
Even maybe for Daytona, you get a guy who is one of the top tier drivers, and for whatever reason, he doesn't qualify great. But then you're noticing, wow, he's got super fast practice speeds. He's hitting this. He's predominantly had, good history here. Maybe you bump him to 50% or 60%. Mm-hmm. It's all how things kind of roll out.
Gotcha.
The next couple days, and you'll learn stuff tonight watching the duels. These are obviously a lot shorter. They're a lot quicker, but some of these guys will race this like it's the Daytona 500.
Right.
They don't care. So, and then there's some that are conservative. You may have a team that doesn't care if they wreck their car because they got, backups. You may have a team that's running these duels that doesn't have backup cars, so they're gonna play conservative. But then when the race starts, they may be aggressive. So it may look crappy during tonight, but come Sunday, they got a great car. It's some predictable, some it's just it happens.
Yeah, I mean, the takeaway here I'm getting too, especially, and I mean, for me personally, I'm just glad we had this conversation, is that the qualifiers and the practice and things like that are some of probably the highest value research that you could do to figure out how you want to tackle the slate on Sunday.
Yeah, a lot of people don't look at any of that stuff. They wait for the projections to come out from whoever they're getting them from.
Yeah.
They pop them in their optimizer, hit go, adjust some percentages, and go from there. Like I said, you could have a guy who qualified well because maybe he qualified earlier when the track was greener, but his practice times are terrible. But he's going to be a guy that a lot of people play. Maybe that's the chalk you fade a little bit, based on your research of seeing qualifying and practice.
Gotcha. Yeah. Cool. Okay. You had mentioned, and then I think we'll probably talk about this and then maybe move into some questions because I see some questions coming in here. You'd mentioned the new car this season. Is there anything else new to NASCAR for this particular year? And on a DFS level, is there anything that you're kind of changing about the way that you're going to approach lineup building this year with the new car, but also anything else that's new for this season?
Truthfully, I haven't. I'm a little behind on my research this year.
Okay.
The things that I could see looking at different would be pit stops. Mm-hmm. You're going from one log, from 5 logs to 1 log. That changes pit times. If you have a pit crew that is maybe a decent pit crew but is not great with tires, this could help them. There was another change. I don't recall off the top of my head. I have to look it up. I believe with the number of people allowed out during a pit stop, or they changed, or they changed what one person was allowed to do this year, what they weren't allowed to do last year. Meaning, like, they could only do X last year, but this year they can do X and Y while they're out there. Like the fuel, and it's not this, but like the fuel man can only fuel, But now this year he can do fuel and he can adjust the traction bar. There's some things like that. I'd have to look. I could probably pull that up while we're talking.
No, that's fine too. I definitely didn't mean to put you on the spot. I had remembered reading about the new car here this season, and you had mentioned it. Was curious on that one, but
let's see. Looks like they're going to have tougher penalty systems this year. Some spoiler changes. Looks like they're targeting 670 horsepower. let's see if any other stuff pops out. Yeah, there are some new changes.
Benny said there was a change to the fueling process, I believe, too.
That might be the one then that I saw was changing. Oh, here we go. Rules package. For short tracks, road courses, most intermediate tracks, NASCAR will use a 670 horsepower base engine and a drastically reduced 4-inch spoiler. Other packages with a 550 horsepower up to 6-inch spoiler. What else? Looks like Goodyear has some new tires for them this year.
Gotcha.
I think they might be lower profile tires this year.
So, I mean, I guess kind of thinking in just general terms, rather than necessarily the specifics of every change, for me, I'm thinking maybe this puts a little bit more value on some short-term results, especially as this season kind of progresses here. If you're seeing maybe particularly different results than you might have expected in the past, maybe it is a reason to just increase the value of the most like recent form, I guess, is kind of the way I'm thinking about it here with all these changes.
Yeah. And you'll see NASCAR will change stuff. Like, for example, they get out tomorrow or, this race, and for whatever reason, the spoiler with the new wheels with this causes cars to flip, like at a high rate. They'll say, oh, we got to, put a 40-inch spoiler on and, set a max air pressure. So they'll do things like that going forward. They've had issues in the past with tires blowing like pretty significantly. I don't know if they've, worked on that over the off season. So they will change stuff throughout the season too. But go back to what you said. I do think sometimes recent form as far as drivers can, be beneficial. Like last year, Kyle Busch was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Year before, you basically had to play him every race because he was unstoppable. Last year, Larson, just raced his ass off.
Yeah.
Well, So,
gotcha.
There's a lot of things to keep on. It's pretty fluid. Like I said, you can't say, I'm playing Kyle Busch every week because it may work. He may have one of those years and it just may not.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Cool. Okay. I want to knock out, I think we've done a pretty good job of answering a lot of the questions that had come in before the stream so far. There's a couple I just wanted to note here. There was a good question, thinking about the exposures to different drivers and then also the different kind of driver types of the dominator, versus the place differential. Do you handle exposures differently between those two types of drivers? Like, do you have a more condensed pool of dominators that maybe you're playing, or you're willing to be a little bit higher exposed to those kinds of drivers versus, the driver starting at the back, or is it just in general across the entire race, you kind of want to have kind of a flatter max exposure?
Right. So you're going to have a set amount of dominators. It's just what it is. Not everybody's going to dominate.
Mm-hmm.
Certain races might be a 1 or less dominator. Certain races might be a 2 or 3 dominator.
Gotcha.
And then mix it in. And right, you can set, you set your dominator pool, and you want to have, maybe at least one of these guys in every lineup. 5 guys, I want one of each, or maybe 2, stuff like that. But for the most part, I still wouldn't go necessarily above my total exposure limit just for those, because they're dominators or not. For the most part, I'm usually, I set a hard cap and work it into, through that.
So Wes asked a question that I think is kind of similar here about limiting exposure to guys starting at the front, and whether you do that with groups or exposures to drivers. With our new groups functionality in SaberSim, you can actually do this. You can set a group rule to say max 1 or max 2 of these particular drivers. And I'd be happy, I could show how you'd maybe do that, but maybe first I'd be interested from you. Is that something that you would recommend doing, like a kind of a take these two drivers, maybe you have a race that there's two dominators for this race and you only ever want one in the same lineup, or
Yeah,
what are your
absolutely.
thoughts on?
For a plate race, absolutely. For Daytona, you probably really in the top 10 or 12, you want maybe two at most of those guys in the same line. For whatever reason, the front is usually what gets, knocked out. I guess maybe they're racing a little harder or whatnot. But yeah, you don't, you definitely want to limit certain of those. And you definitely don't want like a lineup that's, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I would definitely set a group and say, like, out of these, maybe not necessarily dominated for this race, but out of the top 10 or 12, I only want 1 or 2.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. And I mean, one thing I would say too, is as with all of the groups on our app, I'd always recommend people start with a test build and just see how things are looking. And you don't necessarily need to put yourself in a situation where you have to build a ton of groups if you don't need that, right? And I think the simulations will kind of help a little bit to like make sure that you're getting lineups that actually have a legitimate chance to be optimals, rather than just being really good average projected lineups. But I think to add a little bit of additional control over the process, the groups functionality is a great way to do that. But
yeah, especially in a plate race, you can probably get away with a couple groups in a plate race. You could say like top 10, I want 2 max, back 10 or 15, I want 3 or 4, or a minimum of 3 or 4 of those, the back lie guys. And then I say I need at least 2 from the middle. I would definitely for play races do something like that. Because a lot of those back guys, and those back guys are going to be the cheap guys, which is what's going to lower your top salary. Mm-hmm. But for the plate race, you're going to want less from the front, more from the back, and a mix of the middle is what I would say. I don't have the statistic right in front of me, but it's, you got like top 5 and front row. Sometimes you can almost even fade in plate races. I think if you look at it, the number of, and you can't necessarily look at Daytona 500 because you got to look at, obviously DraftKings or FanDuel wins. Mm-hmm. Those guys being in an optimal lineup at like Daytona is pretty low, just for how this race runs. You see a lot more of the, maybe, your optimal's got one of those top 10 guys and the rest is mid to back. Just because of the carnage, as they say, the big one. Whereas, you may get another track, like I said, it has, trouble passing, where you want 2 dominators and you don't want those guys in the back because they're going to get lapped 4 times over. Mm-hmm. But for Daytona, I definitely like the idea of a couple groups, maybe, saying max of this from the front, a couple of these, and then a minimum of X from the back would probably be a pretty solid strategy.
Okay, cool.
I don't know if that makes sense, but
no, it makes perfect sense. I'm just absorbing here. So yeah, I think the one other question, and I know we had chatted about this a little bit beforehand. I know you're more of a DraftKings guy, but differences between the sites, FanDuel and DraftKings. It seems like in the little bit of research we were doing before here that maybe the value of dominators comes down a little bit in the FanDuel side of things with no fastest lap and a little bit lower point totals for those guys. What do you think about differences between strategies between the two sites there?
So for the people who play both sites for other sports, a good example is looking at Showdown Captain versus Showdown MVP. Mm-hmm. A lot of times, someone who's a great DraftKings captain is a terrible FanDuel MVP. So you got to look at it like that. You got to look at the scoring rules and see. Like, you may have a guy that you want to lock on DraftKings, and on FanDuel, he may not even be playable. Mm-hmm. Usually a lot of that is also their salaries vary. Like, you get a guy on DraftKings might be min price, but he's, mid or upper tier on FanDuel. And it's the same as the other sports with them. They, I think sometimes they look at each other's scoring and pricing and say, well, let's flip it up and make this guy crazy priced or something. I don't know how it happens, but
yeah,
and like it's completely different. And there was one other thing. I think they do one additional scoring thing on FanDuel, which happens, right away. I think DraftKings doesn't add in one until the end, but FanDuel has the scoring right away. Like I said, I'm not super familiar with FanDuel scoring because I don't really play a lot. Every once in a while, if I have a free ticket, I'll throw a line in.
Yeah. Well, I think the takeaway here, too, is that the scoring is pretty different. So I would say as you're doing your research, research the drivers, research the race, but then run a test build. Don't put any rules in. Just run a test build. See who's popping on both sites, because I think it's probably going to be kind of different based on those salaries. Obviously, the SaberSim model is going to take into account the scoring systems of the sites. So there might be a play that is a really good play on FanDuel that isn't so much on DraftKings or vice versa. It's worth doing that little bit of research rather than just assuming it's going to be super similar, because it probably won't.
Right, just because you run, your lines on DraftKings and get 80% of Kyle Larson. Kyle Larson might not be playable on FanDuel. You gotta really look at all of it. I agree. Running, even if you run 10 lines on each site, or you run 5,000 on, each for each site, and to kind of see where the numbers are falling. But definitely, if you play both sites, don't lock yourself into one set because one site has it. It can be quite different.
Right. Gotcha. Cool.
I don't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
To keep an eye on too is you will see, it's a little bit of a cheat. You'll see on certain times where FanDuel will lock before DraftKings. Sometimes they push the lock back. DraftKings will push it back. Sometimes FanDuel doesn't. It can give you a kind of glimpse. I know we just talked about it not being that, but it can give you a somewhat of an ownership idea. Sometimes FanDuel locks 5-10 minutes before DraftKings. Like I said, ownerships are not going to be identical, but you'll get an idea like, all right, well, these 5 guys are super high owned on FanDuel. Chances are they're going to drop higher on DraftKings as well. Just something to take out if you want to, kind of move your lines around, or if you're only doing a single bullet and you really want to try to get away from, a common line. That's something to think about.
Super sneaky. Yeah, I love that. I guess, even if the salaries are different, I think probably the drivers that came in higher than you expected on FanDuel are probably going to come in higher than you might expect on DraftKings.
Exactly.
That is super, super clever.
Yes. Because for the most part, for the most part, you're going to, get a lot of similarities in lines. There will be some that are drastically different, but you kind of get an idea of where, the crowd's going.
Right. Gotcha.
That may, if you're a borderline on 2 drivers, one's 50% on FanDuel and one's 10%, maybe you go to that 10% guy,
right?
Just to see how it drops. But that does happen more often than you would think. So just something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I'm. That's crazy that they haven't tightened that up, but that is a nice little edge there. I had no idea. So cool. I mean, I think so. This has gone super fast. We're already at about an hour. I think we've done a pretty good job covering, again, most of the questions that have come in here just throughout our little chat here. You had mentioned that you'd be around here in the Slack community over the next couple days leading up to Daytona. If people have any other questions for you,
yeah, hit me up in the NASCAR thread or DM. I mean, thread might be a little better that way. People can see, someone might have the same question as you. They don't want to ask, or I don't want to answer 15 times. So
right,
I will answer DMs. I may be a little slow. I got kids and a job, unfortunately. Not to the kids, to the job. But, but I will do my best to answer. If anything crazy pops up, that I see or anything good, just I'll pop it in there so you guys, and if it's really crazy, I'll add everybody. But I'll try not to do stuff like that. I don't even know if I can, but
yeah, I think you can. We leave that up to people in the Slack community.
That's right. Use, I think I got at everyone from
Matt Fitzpatrick withdrawal.
No, I got that today.
Yeah,
I think it would have been better with Matt Fitzpatrick over Gooch, but
right.
I think somebody from the like tech support channel added everybody like that. I don't know.
Yeah. Cool. I mean, so I was taking some notes here. I was gonna, as a way to kind of close this out, I was gonna give, maybe my 3 takeaways here. Maybe you can listen to them. Let me know if you think that's good, and if you've got something to add on here before we close out. So I mean, what I'm thinking here, high variance sport where want to be cautious with your exposure to any one player or any one driver. I guess be careful with the chalk just because of how high variance that the game plays. To best places to research, follow the practices and the qualifying events that are going up leading up into the weekend, just because there's so many people that aren't paying attention there. And then I had research the track, the specifics with the track history for drivers, the characteristics of that particular track, is my kind of 3 takeaways. So anything else, what do you think about those 3, and anything else you want to add on here as we close out?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, just for a little peace of mind, you may want to not even open the app until after, that's another thing. And I say after the race, because you'll see NASCAR update 5, 6, 7 times after the race is finished, just because they do all, digital lap stuff. So at the end of the race, especially when you have the big one, the race could be over, you're winning, $1 million, and they finally catch up what positions people actually finish in, and your $1 million is not $1 million anymore. But yeah, like I said, it's a sport where you can set it once you're in, you're done. There's no, worrying about stuff after the fact. It's a fun sport to watch, believe it or not. I know they just drive around circles, but it could be fun, especially when you got a little, DFS on it.
Right.
And you make your lines and like I said, set what you're good with. NASCAR is a great sport to play with, just entering the jukebox at for $5.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to do it. I don't know if we talked much about contests, but the top contests are pretty top heavy. The other ones you can get in, same as the other sports. Minimax is a tough beast to tame. I still think the Minimax is probably the hardest contest out there.
Yeah.
But can give you a decent contest to drop a good amount of lines without breaking the bank on.
Mm-hmm.
And just do your lines and keep your fingers crossed. This week, don't let this week discourage you. It's going to be crazy. It's the NASCAR Super Bowl, but it's day 1, and it's going to be carnage. That's what happens at Daytona. So don't let it discourage you when you think you're doing great and you end up losing it all. It's probably going to happen to a lot of us.
Yeah, I mean, it should at the very least be a fun watch here for this weekend. So we'll go ahead. We'll wrap it up there. Again, I mean, a huge thank you to you for coming on and talking it through with me. I learned a ton. I hope everybody watching here learned something from this. Again, one more note here, I guess, before we close out, is that this is the beginning, I guess, of our debut of the NASCAR simulations on our site. So we'll be planning on doing some more supporting content over the next week. I want to have the model guys come on and talk a little bit about through the simulation model itself and talk about how that's all put together. And then we'll probably culminate this all in kind of a guide or something about how to play NASCAR DFS coming out most likely next week. If you're interested in checking out our simulations or our projections for NASCAR DFS or for the Daytona 500, we have a free 7-day trial on our site. You can sign up. Won't get any NBA unless you sign up right now and get to play tonight, of course, with the All-Star break. But you can come in, check us out for the Daytona 500, maybe play a little bit of NHL DFS or anything else going on this week. So again, good luck to everybody in your Daytona 500 lineups. Dan, thank you again for coming on, and we'll see you all next time. See ya.
See ya.